Thank you everyone for joining this evening's IBA Stage, in which we have the pleasure to have with us Ryan Hughes and Anneka from the third Coventry Biennial titled Hyper Possible. I am excited about this third event of the IBA Stage series in 2020. And I'm also glad to be back in the UK after having the Liverpool Biennial with us as the starting of our IBA Stage series last year. Before I give any introduction and then give the word to Ryan and Anneka that will bring us through talk us through their biennial. I just wanted to give some basic house rules, which will help the discussion. And these are, if you wish to speak or pose questions, please raise your hands in the Zoom function. You may also type your questions in the chats if you prefer. We also ask you to please keep your mics and cameras off during the presentation. You're more than welcome to turn your camera on afterwards for the discussion, but keep your mic closed to avoid any mishaps with the technical sides. And I also have to remind everyone that this session is recorded for archive and for our YouTube channel afterwards, and it is also being streamed through our social media channels. So welcome also for those of us that are, for those of you that are following us through the YouTube stream and Facebook. Having done my due diligence on our house rules, I'm very happy to welcome Anneka who is a writer and independent curator working with Coventry Biennial. She writes for publications including Art Quarterly, Photo Monitor, and has had a writing and editorial commission for the Turner Prize in 2021. 5 Station Artists, Studio Ireland, Studios, sorry, Social Works, Open Journal, TACO, Photo Works Plus, Grain Projects, Creative Black Country, and Living Memory. She spent 4 years as coordinator and then director of Regional Visual and Arts Network, New Arts West Midlands, CVNA, and spent 6 years as editorial manager of contemporary art magazine This Is Tomorrow. Anneka has worked at galleries including Tate Modern, Icon Gallery, the New Art Gallery, Valsal, sorry, and Wolverhampton Art Gallery. Thank you for joining us, Anneka. Also joining us from Coventry today is Ryan Hughes, who is an artist, curator, and independent researcher interested in DIY cultures, collaboration, community, and what was briefly called the post-internet. He is founder and artistic director of Coventry Biennial. Prior to this biennial, he made projects working closely with artists, academic, musicians, and technologists at spaces include MK Gallery, ICA London, Leamington Spa Town Hall, the slopes of Kader Idris, sorry, and the streets of Digbeth. He has spoken nationally, internationally at events organized by the British Council, Kunsthal Ghent, and East Side Project, as well as at a wide range of universities and educational institutions. Thank you very much for both of you to be joining us today, and I leave you the floor to introduce us and walk us through the third Coventry Biennial. Thank you for joining.
Thanks so much for having us. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm going to be glancing down throughout the presentation quite frequently. For those of you that have seen me speak before, I'm prone to tangents. So I've got a scripted section here that I'm going to be referring to. Of course, Anneka's a much more natural speaker than I am, so in her sections of the presentation, you'll feel some more sort of conversational input. To start the presentation, it felt really important that we actually gave some context into Coventry. So, of course, Coventry is a small city. We're looking at a population of around 380,000 people, and we're really right in the middle of the UK. So we're about an hour from London, about 20 minutes from Birmingham. And so we've got this really interesting relationship with the rest of the country. It's very easy for people to get to Coventry. The city itself is perhaps most well known for being destroyed during the Blitz and then its post-war sort of modernist rebuild. It was really one of the first cities in the UK to adopt that sort of European style of post-war rebuild. However, since the 1980s, the narrative around the city has really been focused on economic decline, and public perception of the city has been very low. Of course, the city is actually really wonderful. There's a wealth of stunning architecture, fantastic education options. The people of the city are welcoming and are highly creative. And we really wanted to share this image by John Whitmore, an artist from Coventry, as evidence of this creativity that's inherent in the city. After the second biennial, a building that we had taken over called the Row, it was formerly a rehabilitation clinic. This building, the Row, was turned into artist studios, and John took over one of these studios, turning it into a camera obscura, where he captured this large format image of a city under reconstruction as the city was ramping up to deliver UK City of Culture. Of course, UK City of Culture is something we're going to touch on a few times through this presentation. So the City of Culture story really began for Coventry in 2017. The city was just bidding to become UK City of Culture at the same time as having just published its 10-year cultural strategy, which was really trying to instigate this a step change in cultural provision and offerings in the city, as well as really trying to do some of that work in shifting perceptions of the city. And it was in this moment in 2017 that we started Coventry Biennial, really seeing that there was this real opportunity to do something very artist-led, quite direct, and to work quite urgently in Coventry and the surrounding county of Warwickshire. So we delivered, as I've said, biennials in 2017 and 2019. And those biennials were really strategic. We focused on contributing to the aims of the cultural strategy and supporting that bid to become UK City of Culture, which is an award that's given every 4 years. And so whilst we were making these programs, we really made sure that actually the work we were delivering was rooted in the social, political, and critical life of the city, its residents, and its artists. Oh, is that the right slide? It's the slide we've got. I'm going to go with it. So we delivered the third Coventry Biennial called Hyper Possible between October 21 and January 22. The programme was made up of 6 exhibitions spread across Coventry and Warwickshire. And alongside these exhibitions were of course, a wide range of public programmes, including tours, workshops, symposiums, publications, a wide range of sort of activities that really engaged audiences and practitioners in the city and beyond. Many of those projects are what Anneka and I are going to touch on throughout this presentation. The Hyper Possible programme was developed and delivered by a small team of mostly young local practitioners. Most of us are in our 30s and live within 20 miles of Coventry. And this is a really important way of us supporting sector development in the city and region and providing platforms for artists, curators, designers, and a whole host of other creative practitioners enabling young people to really develop their skills. Of course, I mentioned that Coventry's bid to become UK City of Culture in 21 was successful, and this biennial was presented very much as a significant part of the City of Culture programme. Coventry's time as UK City of Culture was particularly focused on developing the diversity and usefulness of the city. Their programme has a really socially engaged aspiration, will of course support an economic and public realm redevelopment of the city. And we saw some of that redevelopment work in John's image just a moment ago. We were fortunate to work closely with the UK City of Culture team on a range of co-commissions and press events that were really contributing to changing that narrative around the city. Of course, a significant part of the UK City of Culture title includes the opportunity to host the Turner Prize. Previously, Derry London, Derry and Hull had both hosted the Turner Prize when they were City of Culture in 2013 and 2017 respectively, and Coventry took the opportunity to host the Turner Prize in 21. Of course, as the dates for the Turner Prize and the dates of the Hyperpossible programme were so closely aligned, and indeed we were sharing a building, both of our exhibitions were in the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum, there was this really interesting relationship between the Turner Prize and the Hyperpossible programme. Of course, with the last Turner Prize having a short list of 4 socially engaged collectives, it not only spoke to City of Culture's priorities around improving accessibility to art, but of course spoke to our own priorities around socially, politically and critically engaged practices, which we think created a really powerful experience for visitors to our shows. Excitingly, the Turner Prize also presented significant opportunities for local practitioners. And as Christian mentioned in the introduction, Anneka did some work with the Turner Prize on their publication programme. What we felt was really important, having mentioned that Coventry had been so negatively perceived in the past, was that within the City of Culture year, we really wanted to address this, this misconception of the city. And we wanted our programme to present some of the best contemporary art that has been developed in the city, but has had national and international reach. And really, we wanted to look at how artists were working in with the legacy of some of those moments. So we identified a trio of art historical moments that are really rooted in the city. And each of these moments happened to have also been rooted in education and had a really collaborative focus within the practice. What we're seeing here is a shot from our exhibition at the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum, featuring 3 works by Art and Language. Art and Language are, of course, most well known as some of the forefathers of conceptual art, having exhibited in Documenta, represented by Listen Gallery, publications and exhibitions around the world. But what's perhaps less well known is that the group formed in Coventry, the art theory course at Coventry Polytechnic, brought together a group of lecturers and students who were really trying to engage with what was happening in artistic practice globally at that time, and started to make work together under the name Art and Language. And so we wanted to make sure that we were really sort of reflecting on that moment and sharing some of the great work that was made at that time in the city. The next slide we have here is this representing the second of our starting points. 15 years on from that Art and Language moment, but in the same building, still in Coventry Polytechnic, Keith Piper and Eddie Chambers met while studying on the foundation course there. Of course, Keith and Eddie went on to be founder members of the Black Art Group, which is much more closely associated with our nearby city of Wolverhampton and perhaps Nottingham as well. But again, similarly to Art and Language, less well known is that Keith and Eddie were there in Coventry making some of their earlier works. And in 1983, the Pan-Africa Connection exhibition toured to the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum. So again, there was this second moment where collaborative radical artistic practice that was really rooted in education was really evident in the city. The third of our starting points was the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit. This was based up at the University of Warwick, which, despite its name, is in Coventry. And there was a group of academics there who were really exploring the what was at the time like a developing cyber culture. They were working in the early 1990s. They were interested in rave culture, cyber feminism, Afrofuturism, and were really trying to explore what was happening in popular culture at the time and in society. The members of that group were not specifically artists at the time, although lots of members do now work in the art world. So Kodo Ashun of the Otterlift Group was involved in the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit. Steve Goodman of Hyperdub Records. Mark Fisher was a member of the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit. So again, there was this third, incredibly collaborative, really energetic, quite radical moment that was happening in the city. And so we had these three starting points that felt like they were really roots for everything that had happened in Coventry since. And from those three starting points, we devised a way to commission a wide range of new works by perhaps more contemporary artists, but not always. And those commissions, alongside some of these historical moments, are what formed the Hyperpossible programme. Coming out from these starting points are a range of hyperpaths, which were designed to lead audiences through the shows, which Anneka will talk about now.
Indeed. Thanks, Ryan. So yes, so from following those three starting points, we wanted to develop some other themes that would help audiences navigate the exhibition programme more widely. So I'm just going to talk you through what those six strands were. We called them hyperpaths, and included them on our interpretation material so that it was potentially a kind of physical trail that people could follow, if not just a kind of conceptual trail. So the first one is real life science fiction. And in this hyperpath, artists were taking inspiration from the genre of sci-fi, speculatively considering how technologies affect everyday lives and exploring how the genre allows critical examination of the present and of the kind of recent past as well, while looking at futures with radical potential. So as Ryan mentioned, the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, we're really interested in ideas around Afrofuturism and cyberfeminism. So that very much falls within this hyperpath. But also it's important to note that Coventry and Warwickshire have a kind of particularly forward-looking technological status. Coventry is one of the 5G testbed cities, and Leamington Spa, that we've mentioned once or twice, has one of the largest video games development industries in the UK as well. New know-how is number two. Artists in the new know-how path that we were looking at were exploring ideas around new and radical approaches to education, something that we've mentioned already, but also participation and co-creation, looking at different ways of forming knowledge production. So each of the three starting points that we've talked about have close ties to education. Art and language being lecturers at Coventry Polytechnic, what was formerly known as Coventry Polytechnic. The Black Art Group met and organised while students, as we've talked about as well, and the C Crew were based in the philosophy department of the University of Warwick. Likewise, though, the groundbreaking theatre and education movement was also founded in Coventry in the 60s, again showing how the city has always been committed to innovative practice and innovative creative education as well. Home and other habitats is possibly our most kind of COVID related hyperpath that we developed for some obvious reasons. So we're looking in this one at how artists were looking at relationships to home and other places that they might have lived, and how the kind of impact of social and political shifts and the pandemic, of course, have impacted upon those relationships. So the lockdowns, for instance, have highlighted concerns and tensions around the housing market, the kind of cost of living, and artists are, of course, really important within those conversations. Likewise, two of our starting points also have a really interesting relationship to the domestic. So Art and Language, for instance, published their first journal from Jubilee Crescent in Coventry, following disagreements at the University of Warwick, and the Cybernetic, following disagreements at the University of Warwick, the Sea Crew relocated their activities to an apartment in Leamington Spa. So personal and public dissent is our most political hyperpath, as the name would probably suggest, looking here at individual and collective identities and the impacts that we have, that artists have, and that each of us might have in relation to politics and society. So this hyperpath really looked at activism particularly, and that's important when we're considering the history of Coventry, the city that produced the two-tone music scene that was, you know, active and working hard to diffuse and kind of rework racial tensions in what was an interesting time in Thatcher era Britain in the 80s. So Sensing the Anthropocene is number 5. Here we were looking at the impacts that humans, of course, are having on the planet. And a large component of this path was looking at moving image and sound work, particularly in one of our exhibitions, which was located at Coventry Cathedral, that was called Listening to the Anthropocene, that particular exhibition, and was a sound-based project. So ideas around climate change and justice being particularly relevant to Coventry. For instance, the UK's Green Party, political party, developed out of the People Party that was founded in Coventry in the 70s. So do it yourself, DIY. In this one, as the name suggests, we were looking at artists who are self-organising, looking at providing instructions, invitations, scores and guidance, and that whole kind of theme of practice, which we've seen kind of come to the fore really, I think, within the pandemic itself. So challenging ideas around how artworks are made, how audiences might engage with those, and giving the audiences much greater agency potentially within that relationship. So Art and Language and the wider conceptual movement attempted to create these new relationships, of course, but the Black Art Group, as we've talked about, was formed by a group of students self-organising. This was also a kind of key, this whole theme and this hyperpath was a key part of our COVID contingency planning as well. So the next little section is going to talk about some of the activities that we undertook just prior to the biennial exhibition's opening. So some of our kind of specific outputs and projects and programs that were part of that build up and that lead up, which was, of course, taking place in summer, throughout 2020, at a difficult time for everybody, and you know, under challenging circumstances, to try to put together a big program like this. So one of our examples is a series of communiques that we published. So these were print-based publications, and we use them as a kind of way to creatively respond to the restrictions that we were experiencing because of COVID. Following our interest in artist publishing, following our interest in kind of self-organising and so on, that's come through the Art and Language starting point, amongst others, and various other our hyperpaths. So these were publications that were posted to people's addresses free of charge that signed up to our mailing list. A series of 5 of them were produced in 2020 and 21. And the kind of the aim of them, or the kind of the ideas behind them, were to share research that we'd been working on, share announcements that we'd have about venues, artists, commissions, collaborations, was also to put artists in conversation with each other on occasion. So for instance, more established artists kind of having a really interesting conversation with somebody at an earlier stage in their career, but also we had themed issues. So we had an issue that was themed around home and other habitats, and this one that you can see on the slide here, which was called Introducing Do It Yourself. So in this one and one of our others, we had a number of artist commissions, artist works within the issue itself. And these included scores, short stories, postcards, a board game, bookmarks, and kind of various other like ephemera and kind of instructions and invitations to get involved. They connect to our exhibition catalogue, the biennial book as well, and we're looking at how we might move and continue to develop this strand of activity moving forward. Another of our key kind of pre-biennial activities and activity that continued throughout the biennial as well is our work with an organisation called Mothers Who Make. So Mothers Who Make, if you haven't come across it before, it's an international grassroots movement dedicated to supporting mothers who are also makers, artists and creatives rather. Every kind of maker is welcome, and every kind of mother, everybody who identifies as a mother. And of course, children being really welcome at the events and projects too is really crucial when thinking about accessibility and parity and these sorts of ideas. So Mothers Who Make has a Coventry branch, and those sessions are facilitated by Coventry-based artists and mother called Adele Mary Reid, who has come on board into our team. And we've supported over the past year the activities that are output through Mothers Who Make Coventry. And is part of a strategic partnership that we've identified as being really, really important and exciting. And it ensures that this resource and this network that is already really well used and valued continues to flourish in the city through that financial support and through kind of other sorts of support that we're able to offer. So events that Mothers Who Make are working on include peer support meetings, workshops of various kinds, cyanotype zines, various things. And it's, as I say, it's a very inclusive and welcoming space for all sorts of mothers and all sorts of makers as well. And we're continuing consultations at the moment with members of the Coventry Hub and with Adele as to how we can continue to support that in the future moving forward.
So coming out of the COVID lockdowns in 2020, we were really aware that audiences hadn't had the opportunity to see art for quite some time, and were possibly quite nervous about the prospect of visiting busy exhibitions again. We were also aware that we were coming up on the start of the City of Culture year, and that actually the impacts of COVID had meant that the city was a little behind in terms of preparation. Technical and front of house teams hadn't worked for a while. We hadn't pinned down a ticketing system. Audiences didn't know how to find out the most up-to-date information necessarily. And of course, at the same time, we had developed this really rich program and this thread of activity that Anneka and I have described that was really rooted in the city's history and context. And so with that in mind, we decided to present a small exhibition before the biennial opened of Otterlift 1, which is an early film work by the Otterlift Group that's part of Arts Council's collection. And we presented this work in, you can't tell here because we blacked out the space, but in Coventry's iconic post-war cathedral. So this was a really strong introduction to one of our starting points, with the Otterlift Group having been involved in the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit, but the work particularly also spoke to many of our hyperpaths. The film explores identity, time travel, how we might live in the future and how we share knowledge. But this exhibition was really around us trialing opening buildings again after COVID, testing our relationships with the team and partners, and discovering how audiences might engage with art in this world where we're living with COVID. Another project that we delivered prior to the biennial opening was called Art Can Be Rubbish Too. This was a project that we co-commissioned with UK City of Culture as part of their Green Futures programme. And really through this project, Rob Hamper, local artist, was working with a wide range of youth groups in the city and across Warwickshire. Rob took this bin that's featured in the image here. This is a Coventry City bin. He took the bin in these youth groups from Coventry and Warwickshire to a wide range of coastal locations, including St Ives, Folkestone, Weston-super-Mare, and in this image, Blackpool. And on these trips, Rob and the young people collected rubbish and environmental data. This project was really designed as a way to show Coventry's generosity, while also providing opportunities for young people to engage in creative activity and to meet other young creative people from across the UK. And really, of course, as it was part of the Green Futures programme and so engaged in the environment, it was a way to try to enable these young people to embed making positive environmental change in their lives.
So the next project we're going to talk about, this is again part of the kind of build up to the main launch of the programme in October last year. This is a project by two artists based in the Black Country near to Birmingham and then in Warwickshire, Helen Kilby-Nelson and Amelia Hawke. They were commissioned to develop a new project collaboratively, and it rose from conversations with participants of two really key community kind of organisations, making real positive and impactful change within the city of Coventry and the county of Warwickshire. So these are participants from Coventry Refugee and Migrant Centre and from Warwickshire County Council Syrian Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. So Helen and Amelia designed and developed a series of conversations and online workshops with some key individuals who are involved with these two groups. And through these conversations, they were discussing ideas around home, around memory, around food, ideas around belonging, ideas around place, maps, etc. And they developed collaboratively this small publication called Community Notebook, which is available in both English and Arabic, and is a result of not only a kind of document of that work and those conversations, but also a practical and useful notebook that can be used by lots of other audience members of varying kinds too. So the notebook inside has various activities. It has lots of practical information, such as how you might go about getting a dentist, including, did I say recipes? I'm not sure if I've said that already, but recipes that people might want to try out for cakes and various other things. And it was presented at a big community event with a kind of, how to describe it, like a selection of teas that people could kind of concoct themselves and place into little bags and drink and speak with the artists. So the Helen and Amelia have this really beautiful quote that was entirely, it was collaboratively designed with those members, as I've said. This quote is, "It's a book made through conversation, a book made for you, a book to be shared and used. It comes with pencils and ingredients so that you can think with us too." And the next one that I'm going to talk about now is again something that had a longer lead up time, was another socially engaged commission by an artist called Laura Dicken, who's based in the Black Country area of the West Midlands. Laura's family are from a Roma community, and her work is very much focused on social engagement, ideas around migration, belonging and marginalised peoples. She typically works with photography, but as a kind of result of COVID restrictions, has also been looking at moving image work and animation within her practice too. So Laura was commissioned to develop a project that she titled Roots, and this is a new moving image commission which was shown on the exterior of the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum that we've mentioned once or twice. And so it was visible to passers-by who might not be entering the gallery, and it consists of a range of black and white moving image portraits of citizens in the Coventry who identify as being migrants of varying generations. And it's perhaps worth noting that the work actually faces the city's magistrates court, so that kind of throws up an interesting dialogue between those kind of legal structures that people operate within, and these sorts of marginalised communities that Laura was seeking to highlight and showcase within this work. The other thing that's really interesting to note about this is that Laura produced the work entirely remotely, entirely digitally. She was shielding through much of the lockdown period, and so that the Coventry citizens that were involved in this collaboration were posted packs of information and had all of their other communications with Laura were done digitally. So this really kind of beautiful and moving image portrait was produced with some of our, some of Coventry's most important but overlooked migrant and diaspora communities.
And so that brings us up to October 21, when we were able to open the doors of the biennial. We were in the calm between COVID storms, as it were. And at the core of the Hyperpossible exhibitions programme were a pair of exhibitions, both called Hyperpossible, one at the Herbert Art Gallery and Museum and one at Leamington Spa Art Gallery and Museum. These exhibitions both started with historical sections that were dedicated to the three starting points. There were works by Art and Language, as you saw earlier, but also works by one of the founder members of the group, Terry Atkinson, were particularly installed at Leamington Museum. Terry's based in the town there, so that made sort of good local sense. And there were also works by members of the Black Art group, specifically Claudette Johnson and Keith Piper in both venues, again, as you saw earlier. And also in these introduction sections, we presented various versions of Jeremy Deller's History of the World for its reference to rave culture and popular culture. And this really served as a visual introduction to the interests of the Cybernetic Culture Research Unit. Although worth noting, of course, Jeremy wasn't a member of that research unit, but the content of the work aligns really nicely. And then as we went deeper into these shows after those opening sections, there were newly commissioned works and projects on loan from studios and collections that spoke to the legacy and impacts of those three starting points. These were often, but not always, more contemporary works and were selected really in response to those hyperpaths, which Anneka described, ensuring real relevance for our audiences. So in this image, it's a detail of an installation by collaborative practice Geoffrey Charles Henry Peacock. They're really interested in the power structures of the art world and often use materials, processes and practices that were instigated by a generation of conceptual artists who preceded them. But they're really using those techniques and modes of working to reflect on current cultural value. Interestingly, before the biennial, they were also working with art students in the city on workshopping a sitcom based in an art school, which is a project that's still continuing to this day. And at some point down the line, Geoffrey Charles Henry Peacock and the students will produce a sitcom together. Likewise, this newly commissioned work by British Kenyan artist Grace Doritu similarly relates to the impacts and legacies of our starting points, while also focusing on a wide range of more current trends, issues and concerns. The work was co-commissioned with Nottingham Contemporary and the Voorhout Art Centre in Belgium, and this work explores deep time, philosophy, the negative impacts of the fashion and advertising industries on both the environment and on Black and Indigenous peoples. The work, and indeed Grace's whole practice, relates closely to the lived experience presented by the Black Art Group, while also speaking to our hyperpaths, particularly real-life science fiction and sensing the Anthropocene. And a really important part of our programme includes making significant group exhibitions outside of museum and gallery contexts, just so we can try to really create unique experiences for audiences and unique opportunities for artists. In previous years, as I've mentioned, this has included us working in abandoned factories decommissioned rehabilitation clinics, and a range of medieval spaces, which despite the Blitz, Coventry has many of, including this building which we're sharing at the moment, which is known locally as the Old Grammar School. The Old Grammar School was built in 1154 as a hospital, and when Henry VIII was dissolving the monasteries, he instructed that this building should become a school. It's been largely unused since the 2000s, which is, I guess, why we were able to make an exhibition in the space. But it's in a really prominent city centre location and plays an interesting role in the collective imagination of local residents who wait outside of this building for the bus home, or go to the gym or the streetwear shop next door. As part of the Hyperpossible programme, the exhibition we made in the Old Grammar School was called Proof, and the show ran through the whole building, and it was really reflecting on the role that that building had as a place of learning and the relationships that the Hyperpossible artists also have to education. This was the main room of the space, and in this image we've got works by artists including Yannick Schaefer, Andy Sargent, Rudishu and Cruz. Elsewhere in the building were projects by Sinwai Kin, who of course has just been announced as a nominee for the Turner Prize this year. Very exciting. But there were also works by Keith Piper, Ryan Christopher and many other artists and community groups.
Yeah, so further also thinking about our relationship to the wider county of Warwickshire, where Coventry sits, we produced an exhibition at Rugby Art Gallery and Museum this time round. This is Bodies Archive, Archivers Score, a research project and exhibition curated by Coventry University PhD candidate Rachel Davis, which we worked closely with Rachel upon. And it reflects upon the local area's dance history, and the legacy of artist-led networks, with a focus on a dance company called Cycles. So while other of our exhibitions have been looking at ideas around music and sound and various other kind of art forms, this one is focusing upon dance. So the exhibition project and the archival project worked with many of the original members of Cycles to devise an archival-led exhibition, series of improvised performances and workshops for community groups as well. And we were really excited to be able to support Rachel's research in this area, because like the 3 starting points that we've mentioned a few times now, the kind of city and the county's dance kind of heritage is another overlooked moment in the kind of creative history of the area. So it's really important to be highlighting these things while we're, raising their profile, in a critical sense and a more public sense as well. So Cycles was founded in 1974 at Bath Place in Leamington Spa. I feel like we've mentioned Leamington Spa a lot today. They're getting some good visibility, and toured throughout the UK, giving performances and holding workshops. It was one of the first independent dance groups to be formed in the West Midlands, which is the area that Warwickshire sits within. And Cycles' work was really integral to experimental dance practice and to teaching in the region as well, committed to engaging with new audiences, promoting inclusivity, accessibility, and a kind of non-hierarchical approach to devising performance and sharing and performing as well. So this kind of idea of collaborative working pedagogy that we see in Cycles' work, of course, echoes through many of our other exhibition strands too. So a kind of welcoming and experimental and social ethos, and continues our research, as I mentioned, into these intersections between various art forms and intersections between the starting points and the hyperpaths that we've discussed as well. So I'm just going to hand back over to Ryan now, and he's going to move on to talking about some of the impacts that we saw from the programming.
So across Coventry Biennial's exhibitions, events and activities, I hope you will see that we try to cultivate a welcoming, social and convivial atmosphere. It's not unusual for visitors to bump into members of our team or board, or to meet some of our artists hanging out in venues. Indeed, on this slide, we see a member of Geoffrey Charles Henry Peacock explaining the process of making their work to some visitors. It's quite common for artists that we've commissioned to end up spending 30 minutes or more chatting with groups of volunteers or a visiting school group. And of course, we do schedule that kind of activity formally into our public programmes, but it's these more spontaneous occasions that create a unique and memorable experience for visitors. Another example that springs to mind is Grace Dorito visiting the shows, and I think she must have spent at least 20 minutes with a group of city hosts from the City of Culture team talking about her work. And again, of course, we've described that we articulate our work as being social, and many of our activities are designed to deliver some kind of social, personal, or professional impact for participants and co-creators that we work with. In this slide, we see a member of Crisis UK, a charity that supports homeless people, participating in a photography workshop that we ran. The workshop was really focused on developing skills while reflecting on our relationship to place. And we were really using the writing of Mark Fisher as an inspiration for this body of workshops, thinking about his philosophy of, it's not his, he wrote about it a lot, this idea of hauntology and how that might relate to places. Although we did not formally measure the outcomes of this sort of more socially engaged work, there's a range of very interesting anecdotal evidence for the value of the work. And over the next, I'm going to say 2 months, we'll be publishing a report that really looks into some of those impacts. We're just still in the process of really gathering the data that we can. And of course, we're now only 18 months away from opening the 4th Coventry Biennial in 2023. And we're already talking to artists and partners and have begun fundraising. So we're hoping that later this year we'll be in the position where we can share lots more about the 4th Coventry Biennial. And that brings us to the end of our presentation.
Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, Anneka. It was great. It was a great overview, and I have to congratulate for a project that seems incredibly well intertwined with local structures, local groups, local initiatives, but also and particularly relevant, of course, for the context of Biennial. It seems also very careful in bringing out all the very relevant contributions of Coventry in its region to the cultural history of the UK, but much wider, of course, if you consider some of the groups that you mentioned. It was also quite heartwarming to see some of the images of people gathering despite the pandemic. I have in mind the picture that you showed of the mothers who care, of the mothers who make workshop, but I think there were many instances in which you could see that despite the pandemic, there was a lot of response of local people as well to the project. So really congratulations for that, and thank you for presenting it here today. I want to remind everyone that they're free to turn on their camera if they wish, but I would like them to keep their microphones off for the time being, unless they want to pose a question, in which case they might raise their hand through the Zoom function or write it in the chat, and we'll give them the word. I wanted to start with a very general question to get a better sense of how you had to think and how you had to react to the pandemic and to the lockdowns in the UK in particular. And as I imagine, given the timing of the project, you were just in the process of developing it when the pandemic started. So I'm sure it had also had an impact on how you thought about the exhibition, how you thought about commissioning and so on.
It definitely, yeah, I think in many ways we were really fortunate in that, of course, in March when we went into the first lockdown, we were still half a year or so away from opening. So we did have a bit of time to sort of to actually watch and reflect and respond to what was happening. Of course, our friends up at Liverpool who were trying to open in the summer didn't have that same flexibility. So in one way, we were really quite fortunate that yeah, we had a bit of yeah, we had some time. Of course, though, it did present a huge amount of issues, and through 2020, I think what we were really trying to do was, I guess, in a way, keep morale up with our artists and our team and our audiences and those community groups that are so important to the work that we do. And there was very little that we could really do beyond commissioning work and posting it to people. But I don't know if you want to talk about the communiques a little bit, Anneka, but if those I remember them feeling really urgent.
Yeah, I think for sure. I think there was like a desire, wasn't there, for how on earth is anybody going to engage with anything culturally if it's not through a screen or through a book. So that's why the communiques became so important and kind of went down so well with our audiences, and why people, you know, were keen to get hold of them. And those artworks, I think, especially that were commissioned, while they were kind of small in scale, they had a, you know, an impact that was bigger than the sum of their parts, sort of thing. I think the other thing to think about is, so for instance, that Laura Dicken's commission, that I described, which was the moving image piece that was on the exterior window. So when we first commissioned Laura, those photography sessions or those moving image capture sessions were supposed to be in real life. You know, they were supposed to be in-person things, and then, you know, for various kind of restrictions and more personal kind of shielding requirements, I had to kind of rapidly develop those into something that could be handled in a much more remote and digital and ultimately safe way for the artist and for those people that she was wanting to work with. But I think without all of those restrictions, we wouldn't have that particular the work would be very different. And you could argue, and hopefully it's kind of clear in a sense that that those limitations have been risen too. Laura has potentially surpassed what we could have asked from her rather, because of the limitations forced upon her. And the work speaks about that. The work speaks about this digital necessity. It speaks about the separations between people. It speaks about other sorts of marginalization because of it, not just political or kind of racial marginalization, but also marginalizations even within a home, within a household, within ideas around access and disability and various kind of much wider issues that have kind of become more prominent, I think, since the pandemic has been ongoing.
Yeah, I had another question, but I want to follow up on what you just mentioned now, because during the presentation, it was evident how big a role these partial publication and these smaller publication played a role in your public program, let's call it, in your public phase, let's say, in the way that you approach the public. And I'm wondering if this is this was planned kind of as a response to the situation, or is it just a tool that you found interesting regardless of whether now we're in lockdown or not? Because it feels very much a way of being present also continuously and throughout time, even if there is no possibility of actually visiting a space, for example, because of the limitations. And also, if you can give us a sense of how the publications are structured, what we can find in them, or what the people could find in them that had them.
I mean, I think some of the publications were, of course, the artists were making their works in lockdown. Perhaps people didn't have access to their studios, and I think in many ways making publications was like a really authentic way of artists being able to make under the conditions that they found themselves in. And I think we saw, I remember us talking in our curatorial meetings, we saw so many organizations really rushing to the digital. So many sort of digitally rendered gallery spaces with JPEGs posing as paintings. That actually it felt really important to do something that wasn't that, and really kept the authenticity of the artist's hand. And I think for us, publications was the way that we were able to do that. So that there's projects that we've not talked about here that also had publications. So we commissioned Laura Grace Ford to make a short story about Coventry. She'd spent time in the city in the early 90s. She came back during just after the lockdown, so just before the Biennial opened, and she created this short story that was time traveling between those two moments, looking at how the city had changed. We produced a publication with 31 prisoners from the UK and the US with artist Faye Claridge, and she'd spent I think it must have been around 9 months working with this group of prisoners, sending letters back and forth and building relationships remotely. And there was an exhibition of works that the prisoners produced that we exhibited just between the Biennial and the Turner Prize. So it's sort of like this bridging space. But there was a publication that was sort of alongside that, again, really reflecting on this idea that actually not everybody can get to the Biennial, whether these artists were incarcerated or not. Actually, the context meant they couldn't come. I don't know if you want to perhaps talk about some of the other content, Anneka. I thought your description of Helen and Amelia's publication was wonderful.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, so we had two themed issues, and then 2 issues that were that included these artist commissions, and I think those ones with the artist commissions were some of my favourites, because then you kind of you can't get to a gallery, and you may be limited to the books or the things you have, in your own household at that point. So then the idea of being posted a small artwork with a very personal touch to it, again, because some of those artworks were also, as I mentioned, there was a board game produced by an artist called Rue Dessous. There were scores and short stories, so things you could kind of get involved with as well with your household. So it wasn't just this kind of potentially, depending on your household situation, you might not have been able to do that, but if you're living with living with others, the things you could kind of do together to engage with that kind of cultural content that perhaps you'd been missing terribly, and probably quite likely to have been missing terribly through some of the things we were able to pop through people's post boxes. So I think those sorts of things actually provided quite a lifeline. I know that when I received things from other organisations that had that personal touch, that it was so important, and such a refreshing change as well from just looking at a screen all the time. Of course, I'm aware we're looking at a screen right now.
I think to add to that, of course, we've spoken about this kind of the print against the digital, and so much of that digital content that other organisations are producing is in some ways lost now. But of course, because we were producing tangible objects, these things now have a life of their own, not just in people's homes, but the Paul Mellon Centre for British Art has acquired all of our publications. So these things have have got that kind of a cultural legacy of their own, whilst they're exploring the cultural legacies of the place that we're working in. So I think there's this really rich function that they have, I think.
Yeah, they're also documents of that time as well. They're all, you know, they're all dated, and so there's also these kind of important kind of time capsules, perhaps in a way of people's thoughts and feelings and ideas at those times, which were so important to the shaping of where we are right now.
Just a quick follow-up on this whole discussion about publications. Maybe I missed it. So if I did, I'm really sorry about that. How were they distributed? I mean, I imagine apart from being in the venues, you mentioned in a few instances that you posted them. How did that work exactly, and who did you post them to, and how did you go about that side of the project?
We, in the first instance, we just put on our website that, and this was just right at the very start of the first lockdown, we put on our website, we're building a physical mailing list. We want to send you art. If you're interested in receiving it, sign up. And I think within a couple of days, we had like a few hundred people on the mailing list. And of course, that then started to shape the edition size that we were having printed, and then that mailing list just grew through 2020 and 21. And then, of course, once we started to do some of that in-person work with communities, we would take along a box of publications and make sure that everybody that was involved had copies, and so that they became almost like business cards, so that they're the thing that you hand to people that you're meeting, and of course, yeah, piles of them in venues.
Yeah, and they sit alongside the kind of exhibition catalogue, of course, that we produce, so they kind of form the kind of backdrop and kind of integral parts, offshoots perhaps of the kind of more standard exhibition catalogue that was also produced as well.
So I just want to take a moment to wait if there is any question from the audience. Otherwise, I'll go on with mine. But just to see if there was anyone that wanted to reach out, because we've been. Otherwise, I will continue. One thing I noticed, and that's definitely not the case in all biennials that we get to present and that we see around the world and that we represent as IBA around the world, is I had a sense that it was, and I mentioned this at the beginning, but the more you talk about the project, the more I get a sense that it was a very rooted project also in terms of the artists that you invited, that most of the artists were kind of already working in the region or had links to the region and so on. And I'm wondering, I know that this is part of your general strategy that I read on the mission statement, let's say, of the biennial, but I'm wondering how much this is a consequence of the lockdown, or whether it's something that you really want to pursue as a way of highlighting what is actually happening in Coventry and around there, and how much these overlap, of course.
I mean, of course, we worked with a huge number of artists who perhaps have no relationship to the city, but when invited to talk about the programme, we really want to celebrate those artists that are from the city. We had, I think, 10 or 12 works by Chris Philly, absolutely wonderful works. Chris has no relationship to the biennial, and he doesn't necessarily need us to talk about him right now. So I think our real strategy is around how we can work with some of the world's most established, exciting practitioners, and how we can put them shoulder to shoulder with artists from Coventry, and what that means for each of those groups of artists. We've got, as I said, really wonderful creative practitioners in the city, and I think it's our real commitment to support those artists. certainly when I visit other biennials around the world, I'm trying to get a sense of that place. And it feels like actually by presenting artists from Coventry, when people come to the city, of course, they're getting to see spaces like the old grammar school that we're opening up, but actually they might also discover someone like Ryan Christopher, a young artist that we've worked with a lot. He's from the city, he's just graduated, he's making the most tender, beautiful artwork. And actually, if people visiting Coventry discover his work through the biennial, then it feels like we've achieved something.
Yeah. So yeah, I see that was an editorial line, and I think it's justified, and I hope that also gives a sense to everyone listening in and watching us of the reason why you chose to handle it like that, which is definitely true. It's one of the ways that we experience cities, or one of the things biennials allow us to do, to highlight all of these local artists as well. I want to move into something which might not be as sexy as a question as you might expect, but I'm very much interested in the impact study that you mentioned that you're currently working on. Because IBA is also something, it's a network that is also aimed at other biennial practitioners, and I'm sure that there is a lot of discussions at the moment on how to, I don't want to say measure, but how to give a sense of what a biennial can achieve on a territory, in a city. So you mentioned that the study is not finished yet, but can you give us a sense on how you're working, what kind of things you're looking at, what kind of data you're looking at, or what kind of soft data you're looking at, of course. So.
Of course. So for each biennial, we work with a local cultural consultancy firm, Earth and Lamp. And through our work with them, we're able to capture a huge range of audience data, so numbers of visitors, of course, but also quite in-depth testimonials about the shows, what their experiences of navigating the biennial was, how they heard about the biennial, if they've been before, where they've travelled from. So the kind of audience data that you'd expect. But we also work with Earth and Lamp to do a similar investigation on the impact that the biennial has for our partners. So particularly venues, but not exclusively. Of course, we, as most biennials, don't have their own buildings. We're hugely reliant on the goodwill of partners. So I think really important for us to actually really deeply reflect on what that impact and relationship is. We're also do various forms of artist evaluation. So every artist is offered the opportunity to just complete an anonymous short survey where they can feed back a huge range of experience. And then a selection of artists who we commissioned, again with Earth and Lamp, have a more in-depth case study model. So again, we're looking at how we gathered similar data sets in different ways that might enable people to be reflective in different situations. We then, of course, do a huge range of internal evaluation around what targets have been hit, what targets were missed, staff feedback, front of house teams were a bit chilly in particular venues. How do we combat that next time? And then, so we've more or less gathered all of that data just now, and we're just sort of sifting through it, trying to find out actually what have we learned, what have we achieved, and crucially, what do we want to do next, and what should we do next based on what that data is telling us. Anneka mentioned, of course, as well, that with Mothers Who Make. We've been doing consultation with the members of that network, and we've done similar pieces of work with the prisoners that I mentioned, the homeless groups that I mentioned. And it's our strong intention that we'll be working with those groups again, perhaps introducing them to different artists or different locations, but actually getting the feedback from those groups to make sure that the projects are really delivering, not just creatively and aesthetically, but socially and politically, and that actually we're affecting people's lives in some kind of positive way. I mean, the report itself is currently, the Word document's about 80 odd pages. Of course, I'll share it with you guys once it's complete. I'm trying to get it down to a more consumable 40 pages, I think.
That sounds a lot of work, and I was quite interested also in the fact that you were also doing the same work that you do with venues and so on, but with artists as well. I think that's also very important to understand what kind of impact it has on them, and what kind of feedback they get from, or they can give you from their participation.
I think we've always been quite clear that we've got a professional development role, not just for our team, but also for artists in the region. And so, yeah, I think that feedback's the only way that we can make sure that we're delivering against that. And if we're not, that we can make the changes needed so that we can deliver against that.
We're closing in on our ends. Maybe one last question that I had, also because I know the region and I know the importance of various universities around there, and you mentioned your collaboration with them in a few occasions. I was wondering how you went about this, and how you structured the relation between the biennial, which is, as we know, very important, but also a very agile institution. It shrinks, it grows, and so on. So it has a continuous element, of course, but most of it is something that is intermittent somehow. And how you relate and how you construct a relationship with academic institutions around there.
It's a question we're constantly asking ourselves. I think we've always had a sense that the academic partners are really critical in so many ways. Of course, the artists that we're exhibiting have studied in those schools. But we haven't quite pinned down a really coherent way of working with the universities. We do quite formal things. So Georgia, who's in the meeting now, is been doing a collaborative doctoral award between the Biennial and Coventry University. So there are quite formal pieces of research work that we do with the institutions. Various members of our team have done residencies or fellowships with Coventry University and the University of Warwick. I'm a non-payroll member of staff at Coventry, so I have access to their teams and facilities, and we can feed that back into the biennial. But what we're really trying to work out is actually how do we work in a way that is really mutually beneficial for the biennial, the institutions, and the local sector, because we're aware that actually together we can move things with a fair force. And so of course one way that we're trying to move towards that is co-commissioning works with the universities. Over in 2019 and in 21, we paired academic researchers and artists to work together, where researchers would perhaps share papers or data sets that artists would reinterpret and embed into their practices. That seems to be successful to some extent, but at the same time, it's kind of transactional, and actually what we're really interested in is how artists can have much more agency in that relationship. So I think this is exactly part of the research and the evaluation that we're just doing, actually working out, yeah, what can we offer to the HEIs and what can they offer to us?
Yeah, it's a big question, and I didn't expect a full answer on that, but it's great that you're thinking about it, and that you're trying to establish this relationship in a, as you said, mutually beneficial way. I don't know if you or Anneka want to say any concluding words or statements and so on. From our sides, I really want to thank you for being here. It was great to hear a lot and to gather a lot of information about what you did, and yeah, I just want to congratulate you for a wonderful project.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the invite. And of course, I just want to say thank you to, of course, our team that worked on the biennial and the artists that exhibited, and of course, UK City of Culture and Arts Council England for paying for the thing. So multiple thank yous all round.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. It was really interesting to be part of this wider conversation. So thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Anneka. Thank you, Ryan. I just want to remind everyone in the audience and over our streaming that we will continue with our series soon, next month. And in the meantime, we will also have our IBA Conversations series starting off again towards the end of April. So keep an eye on our social media for any communication on our behalf if you're interested in continuing the discussion with IBA. Thank you very much for being here tonight, and I wish you all a pleasant evening or morning, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you.